Welcome into the quick crash course on the Scandinavian Defense, which is extremely popular on amateur level, and personally I've been playing it all the way up to Grandmaster level. Nowadays my students are crushing with it, especially on level below 2000. It's a really dangerous opening, so let's go ahead and check it out. Alright, the Scandinavian comes off the first move, pawn to e4, and if you're an e4 player yourself, then definitely you need to know how to handle the Scandinavian. So, what's the point of playing this move, pawn to d5? By the way, I'll go real slow, explaining every move in details, because I want that you understand it, so that you don't have to memorize variations, but you just understand all the right ideas, plans, and how to play it, both as white or as black, okay? So, why should black play pawn to d5 on the first move? Well, let's come back to the first, fundamental ideas about the opening. In an opening, you want to develop your pieces and fight for the center. And d5 helps you to achieve both of these goals. You do fight for the center, and you occupy one central square yourself. And on top of that, you open up this diagonal for your bishop and this line for your queen. Therefore, it's kind of an ideal move that fits all the criteria that you wish from an opening move. Now, why would you play d5 instead of more common pawn to e5 on the first move? Well, of course, both moves are perfectly playable. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other one. But some drawback of the move pawn to e5 is that, first of all, your opponents are well familiar with it. This is what they've been studying always, while preparing for a chess game. Secondly, if you play e5, you gotta be ready to face a wide range of different openings, including the King's Gambit, all the standard openings, the Italian game, the Rue Lopez, Ponciani, Scotch game, and whatnot. There's really heavy theory here. Versus the Scandinavian is just a single opening that you learn and you're good to go. That's why I also use it for my students quite often. If I need to give them an opening that they can learn quickly and it's beginner friendly, I often use the Scandinavian Defense. And especially in Blitz, it works well because it's also a more aggressive opening. Now again, comparing to the move pawn to e5. Now we've got a symmetric position and it is white to play. Therefore, white is going to start making moves which are going to put pressure and you're going to need to defend, right? Now, compare this to the Scandinavian. In the Scandinavian, you don't play by their rules, because classical chess rules tell you that since the position is symmetric and white is first to move, they're a little bit ahead and black is rather defensive. Now, here you kind of say, no bro, I'm not playing by your rules. You ain't gonna get anything here. And you challenge his center right away. You don't let white to have any kind of an advantage. You don't let them to have any initiative. And it's a very aggressive opening. That's why it's so good for blitz. All right, now let's move on. What should white do now? As you play d5, you obviously hit this pawn, and they're going to address it somehow. What do? In most cases, they either take or push forward. But for the sake of complete clarity, let me also tell you why these two moves are the main ones, and which one is the best, so that you are ready to face whatever that your opponents could possibly throw at you. Okay, so what else could white possibly do besides, taking or pushing forward? They could try to defend it by going pawn to d3. But in this case, after an exchange in the middle of the board, you are ready to grab his queen, and while he'll have to move the king, and it will stick in the middle of the board, which is inconvenient for white, and white does not have any compensation for that, so that's clearly not a good option for white. What if white simply defends the pawn by going knight to c3, and not only defends the pawn, but it also attacks your pawn on d5? In this case, you do not want to trade. That would indeed fit white's intentions perfectly, but instead you can push forward. It's a great opportunity for you to seize more space, as well as to attack this knight and to push it back to its original square possibly, or somewhere to e2 where it still stands awkwardly and locks the other pieces behind it. Therefore, that just shows to white that their last move, knight c3, was wrong, and it only allowed you to expand and to gain an additional tempo. If white tries to insist on being active and tries to go forward, this can easily backfire, because after e5 you kind of lock the door, and this knight has no way out. Our bishop also takes away this square, so on the next move you're ready to play c6 and, while suffer from horsing around for so long. There's another sideline worth mentioning. It's the move knight to f3, which looks absurd at first. Not only you blunder this pawn, but from there it's gonna attack the knight. But it's worth mentioning this move because it actually is the beginning of the so-called Tennison Gambit, and in the main line white wins real quickly. Of course, it's a tricky opening. If black plays correctly, they can easily stay away from this, but a lot of shameless YouTubers recommended this line for white, myself included, and so you gotta know this little variation. So after pawn takes, white goes knight g5, aiming to get it back, and as black defends it, white then continues with pawn to d3, attacking this pawn twice, black happily trades off, and now white hopes for black to play a natural move pawn h6, which is a big blunder that loses the game. Now, spoiler, you just gotta play any other virtually move here for black, such as knight to c6, and you're a pawn up, and you're good. But if black goes pawn to h6, that fails to knight takes f7. Like, quite a strange combo. King takes, and now bishop to g6. This is a check to the king, as well as discover attack of his queen. And thanks to these tactics, white manages to grab your queen, expose your king, and to win the game. But again, as I mentioned earlier, really easy to stay away from this if you just know this trap. All in all, we've got two main options of white: pawn takes d5 or pawn goes forward e5, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. Pawn takes d5 is the main move, but on amateur level, pawn e5, which is not good objectively, is surprisingly popular. So let's talk about it first. And before we dive into it, let me make a quick note. As we are approaching the end of the year, let me thank you for being part of our community, the Igor Nation, the nation of chess domination. Almost every day I read new comments below the videos about you guys sharing how you crushed somebody, how you gained 400 rating points after studying my videos. You guys are savages, you rock, and it always makes my day to read those comments, so thank you. It's very motivating for me, very nice to know about your chess successes. Also wanting to do something nice for you during this holiday season, and that's why if you want me to help you to achieve your chess goals faster than ever, you can now get my premium courses at up to 80% off. And on top of that, I've also decided to add buy one, get one course free. So you can buy one course and then contact our support, and they'll happily give you another course of your choice for free. And there is no limit to quantity, so if you bought like 4 courses, you'll get 4 courses for free. So with that being said, this offer will only last till the end of the year. So if you're interested, go check this out. I'll drop a link below the video in the description. And now let's get back to the Scandinavian. The problem with white going pawn e5 is that it actually doesn't give much to white, because now you've got a pawn in the center, your opponent's got a pawn in the center, nothing changed besides that, so that really does not give white any advantage. There is a little upside that it takes away this natural square from your knight, therefore it can't develop it easily, but there's also a downside, because this pawn is now far away from the rest of the white's army, and therefore it means that you can possibly try to target this weak pawn. And you can do this by going pawn to c5 first to take away this square so that white can't easily go d4 and support it. Now, if they go d4, you'll always be able to just capture the pawn and eliminate it completely. If they ever try to bring the knight out, you can always pin it so that the knight doesn't do anything. And also, if you want, you'll be able to capture it anytime you want. If they, let's say, neutralize the pin, you then bring the knight out to c6. And now notice that it's already quite difficult for white to defend this pawn. You want to trade off the knight, then capture the pawn. So if they castle or do whatever, you do just that. You trade, knight takes e5, now you're pawn up. If you want to, you can trade off the bishop next, and objectively speaking, this is a technically winning position for black already. Now, what if you can't capture this pawn for whatever reason? Let's say they somehow manage to defend it, doesn't really matter. I mean, your position is still good, even if it's not completely winning, but you'll just continue playing, let's say they do something. For example, it's black to play, so we go e6. For example, they want to play something like this, and again, for some reason, we assume that you cannot take this pawn. You will just develop normally, and in all these variations, you got something very similar to the French defense, but in a much more improved version, because in the French defense, typically your bishop here stands on c8, and it's your major drawback of your position, because the bishop can't get out, but now the bishop is really active, it's ready to trade here, and then this pawn on d4 is always weak. You can always go queen b6 and target it one more time. Therefore, you just got a much better version of the French defense, and it's really nice for you. Now we're approaching the main line. Pawn takes d5, which is the main move and the best move for white. So definitely we gotta spend a little bit of time to understand this position. And by the way, if you're from Norway, Sweden, or Denmark, it's fixed in the constitution that you must know the Scandinavian defense, so watch closely. All right, now as white recaptures, in most cases black recaptures with a queen. There is also an alternative way, which I'll touch a little bit later, but for now let's stick to the main line. Queen takes d5, and here comes knight to c3. So that's the main drawback of the Scandinavian defense, is that you have to bring your queen out early in the game, and white gains a tempo for his development. And that's why it's also good for white to go for this line, because that's the only thing where they can somehow capitalize on their possible advantage. Now, as the knight attacks this queen, in most cases black tries to move it somewhere to a safe square. Beginners sometimes keep doing checks like this, but it's a bad move because while cover, but on the next move they'll keep gaining more temples, and the queen will have to shuffle around and while gain more temples for their development, so that's not a good idea. Black needs to find a safe square for the queen, and that is usually either a5 or d8. Now, beginner players often bring the queen all the way back to d8, and that's a bad option. Why so? It is really safe, but it's also really passive. And it also kind of looks like you've been upset with the way it went out and you're setting it up for the next game, you're ready to resign, it's not good. What can white do in this case? If you're playing it as white and somebody plays this against you, first of all, you can be fairly happy. Secondly, I recommend the move order where you play bishop c4 first. I mean, generally speaking, you just want to play these both moves, but if you play bishop c4 first, you also set a nice little trap along the way. After black develops anyhow, you then go knight f3, and generally speaking, you want to play d4, castle, just play normal development moves. White is ahead in development, has a little bit more space, it's nice for white. If black plays bishop g4, which they often play, trying to pin the knight, you've got a really nice tactical blow, knight to e5. You ignore this pin completely, and moreover, you attack this bishop, kind of forcing it to take the queen, but after that, bishop takes f7 is checkmate in 1. After white attacked your queen, it is better to swing over to a5, to a safe square where white cannot easily attack this queen anymore. And from here, I'll show you a simple setup that you can use as black without knowing in theory, and you can play it regardless of what your opponent plays here. So they go d4 or any other developing move. You do play the move pawn to c6, which takes away these squares from the white pieces, so they can't ever go bishop b5 or knight b5 anywhere in the future. And also you prepare this retreat path for your queen, and you might need it in the future. Now, after white brings the knight over here to f3, you can then play bishop g4 and pin the knight, and also just develop your bishop. There are ways for white to handle this position more aggressively, but they are like complicated and advanced, and unless you're facing titled players, quite often your opponents will be confused and will not know how to attack here as white. They'll just play normal developing moves such as bishop to e2, and then black has no problems. You just develop your knights, you put the pawn to e6, and you've got this setup that you keep playing, kind of like the London system, no matter what your opponent does, you just play this setup. So for example, you go knight d7, they castle, you go knight f6. As soon as they play bishop to d2, trying to x-ray your queen, you can always bring it back to c7. That's why we prepared this escape path in the past. Now, frankly, this x-ray is not all that dangerous, because this knight has nowhere to go. Oops, no, we don't want to take there. I mean, this knight has no square where it could possibly capture something and x-ray your queen with a bishop. So it's not really dangerous, but just to make sure that you don't blunder anything, you can bring your queen back instantaneously. And now after your opponent plays something, in this game they played a3, you then go e6. Now you've got a really great control over this square, so white can't ever push d5, and in the long run, maybe you will place your own knight to this active central square. In this game, white played b4 and now bishop d6. So that's the setup that you're aiming for. After that, you're going to castle and you're good to go. You have a very solid position. Also notice that our c6 pawn is doing a good job. They can't ever go knight b5 and attack your pieces. Therefore, you have a really solid position, and that's the only thing basically that you need to know. From here, you also set up this battery against the h2 pawn, and if your opponent is careless, such as in this game, he played b5, and actually it was a blunder because black could eliminate the knight and then grab this pawn on h2, getting a winning position. But even if your opponent plays something else, let's say they notice and play h3, you just drop the bishop back, you castle, you can go knight d5, life is good, basically you have a nice solid position. So far we've been talking about the classical line, and it is definitely good and playable. You can use just that and you'll be perfectly fine. But let me also add a more sophisticated way of playing the Scandinavian defense, which I personally enjoy the most. Instead of bringing your queen out, which allows your opponent to go knight to c3 and gain a tempo and somewhat get a more active position, you can try to neutralize this only drawback of the Scandinavian defense by playing knight f6 and going after this pawn with your knight. Then the Scandinavian defense has no drawbacks at all, because you destroyed your opponent's center, you also bring your knight out, you centralize the knight, which is a good thing to do, and it's really a win for you all around. So what will your opponent do? Quite often they'll be confused, they'll just play some trivial, development move, which doesn't do anything, and after that you happily get this pawn back, notice that your knight is defended, and you just have no problems. After that you develop as usual, like this, have no problems. Moreover, most of your opponents here will actually take on d5, which is another error, because this time queen stands pretty well on d5. Your opponent simply does not have this knight that could possibly jump to c3 and hit your queen, and so the queen is very comfortable here. After that, again, you're going to go, bishop g4, knight c6, maybe castle queenside, e5, and you see that you even are obtaining a more active position, so clearly you have no problems here. Now it's already time for white to start being a little bit worried about their safety. A little bit of a downside of the move knight f6 is that sometimes it can become more complicated. For example, if white gets greedy and says, hey, you know what, I'm not going to give you this pawn back, I'm playing c4, you ain't going to get it back. Then the variations after that are more complicated, but I still like them, because you play e6. After this trade, yes, white is up a pawn, but you are much more active. Notice that you've got 2 pieces in the game and white is still completely passive. Plus, white has some weaknesses in this backward pawn, which gives you a lot of attacking options. Now, again, the variations are complicated. I'll drop a link below to another video where I analyzed it in more details if you're interested. But for now, let me just show you one of the main lines so that you have a taste of this opening. Let's say white goes d4, which looks really good. Maybe he's ready to push forward. You then go bishop b4, check to the king. White wants to cover, but then you go knight e4. This time, you still capitalize on the pin and you attack the knight once again. White plays another natural move, bishop d2, and all of a sudden it turns out that it was already a blunder, because now queen takes d4 is possible. Notice that because of this bishop, the white queen no longer defended the pawn on d4 and you could just grab it. You also now put pressure all around, with all of your pieces. The queen defends this knight, and if white wants to gain a tempo to attack your queen, as they often do it in the Scandinavian defense in the main line, by knight f3, all of a sudden it's checkmate in one with queen takes f2, and there are thousands of games where white blundered this exact checkmate, which just goes to show how dangerous this variation can be for white. If you enjoy this format of crash courses about particular opening, you can let me know in the comments below which opening you want me to cover next, and you can like this video so that you kind of vote for the continuation, and I will record a video about an opening of your choice. Also, let me just remind you real quick that the biggest sale of the year that I announced earlier will last for several more days till the end of the year. So if you want to take advantage of this opportunity and being told by me and achieve your chess goals, then I'll drop a link below in the description and you can go there and see if there is a course that you like. Either way, thank you very much for watching. Take care.